Good evening, and welcome to Doctorpiece Theater. My name is Dr. Dennis Business, and tonight we're going to continue our dive into Stones to Abbigale. When we last left our hero, we were leaving Davis's memorial service. Chapter 18. I couldn't miss any more days of school, and as Lakewood High had little tolerance for repeat absences. Had I not returned to school shortly after, they would invalidate the work I had already done that semester. I had pretty much the same classes all year. Washington State History 1 and 2 covered my first and second semesters. My teacher's assistant's position was extended for the second semester. Meanwhile, gym class had yet to see Mr. Mack return as far as I knew, but I hadn't been to school in a few days. As I walked into school, it felt like nothing had changed, like no one knew Davis had even existed in the first place. Had they not lost over 40 people the year prior in the shooting, I would have been angered. But tragedy was becoming the theme of our school, and of my own life. You could say we were all stronger because of it. But strength and numbness are two different things. When you can't feel anything because you've been beaten to a point where your senses stop functioning, you don't really have to be strong to endure it. Too many people who remain in a state of numbness, every new blow is nearly indistinguishable from the strikes prior. Call it some twisted way to force us into surviving, despite the conditions being unacceptable in most every way. When my teacher's assistant period began, Miss Robertson paid me a visit. She walked over to me grading papers and asked, "How have you liked working with Mr. Hanson?" I replied, saying, "I like it just fine." She looked over to Mr. Hanson and said, "Would you like to tell him now?" Mr. Hanson smiled and walked to the front of his desk. He leaned against it, but his weight caused it to slide backwards. Quickly he stumbled to stand and blurted out, "Yes, absolutely, James. We were thinking of asking you to take on a special role next year." I looked at him, lacking any feeling or sign of enthusiasm, but he continued, "We wanted you to run for school president, and this whole teacher's assistant's business was just about figuring out if you're the right person for the position, James." I sat and stared at them as if they were playing a sick game with me. But they didn't know I had just lost a friend. They only knew what I was willing to tell them, which was pretty much nothing. "You really just messed with my schedule so I could run for a position that you don't even know if I wanted?" I asked in a monotone voice. Miss Robertson replied, "I know we've had our bumps, James, but judging by Mr. Hanson's positive feedback, you have the strength and sense of integrity we would like to see someone who was running for class president." I replied, "So assaulting 4 jerks in front of the school? That is integrity?" Miss Robinson's posture completely changed. She was clearly offended, and replied, "You heard what that boy said to me? obviously. He and his friends, I could see. She was about to say something that no guidance counselor could justify saying. Mr. Hansen continued, "We believe your dedication and decision-making skills, unlike other schools, the school president here has actual power, James. They have repeatedly in the past become a complete pain to deal with. We think you're different, and think you could actually do something good for the school instead of just causing a headache for the faculty, James." I replied, "There's no guarantee I'd be successful. You could just put all of this faith in me for nothing." Miss Robertson jumped up and said loudly, "We are not going to let the students have another election where they have only an idiot and a moron to choose from. You will win because the people who are right for the job rarely want it. James, you're exactly the person who needs to do this." I looked down at my desk silently. Mr. Hansen said, "You're a good kid. One of the best, James. I think. I wouldn't say it if it wasn't true." Miss Robertson proceeded to leave the room. I felt surprised she was willing to even talk to me after I lectured her about her failures as a guidance counselor. It felt like hours, but finally my teacher's assistant's class was over, and I headed over to the gym class where I saw someone I didn't recognize standing in the middle of the gym. As I walked closer, I realized it was Mr. Mack, only with a massive scar on the right side of his face that led past his hairline. "Mr. Mack!" I screamed. He turned to me and smiled. "Hey, kiddo," he yelled. With a smile on my face, I asked, "I'm so glad you're back. How are you feeling?" Mr. Mack responded, "Well, for a guy who got shot twice, it's not bad, bro." After a moment of thought, I realized this was the first time I had genuinely smiled since Davis died. It was just nice to see the only teacher who really came close to bonding with me alive and well after his hospitalization. Yet Mr. Mack then reminded me I wasn't dressed for gym class. So I ran off to the locker room. As I returned to the main gym, I could see all the students surrounding Mr. Mack. In this moment, I felt a piece of luck shine on me. It was now clear that despite my tardiness, I managed to come back on the first day Mr. Mack was back. He had all of us play dodgeball, just like on the first day I attended this class. This time, Ramon was on my team, and, just as before, our team was lucky enough to claim every victory. There was a decent amount of time left in class, so Mr. Mack decided to tell us about his experiences in the hospital. He told us about how many days he stayed there, how many surgeries he had to have, and he also thanked us for the gifts and visits he received from many of the students. As he talked, time flew by much faster than it ever did when we played games, likely because I had never heard about some of the things he talked about and found it really fascinating. Sitting in the hospital day after day, post-school shooting for as long as he did, Mr. Mack no doubt played out the scenario he endured hundreds of times in his mind. I guess we were the right audience for him to let all his thoughts out to. I felt lucky. As we left the gym together, Abby and I were holding hands as we always did. Walking outside to head to the building our classes were in, I could see Miss Robertson stomping towards us with a scowl on her face, accompanied by 2 police officers. I immediately thought of everything I had done wrong or felt guilty for and assumed I was finally being punished for the fight I had gotten in with the jocks, especially since I blatantly admitted that it happened in my teacher's assistance class earlier in the day in the presence of Miss Robertson. Contrary to my assumption, by looking closer at Miss Robertson's eyes, I could now see she was focused on Abby. She was staring at Abby so intensely, it was almost as if she hadn't even noticed I was there. A wave of fear overtook me. Nervously, I softly said, "Abby," to alert her of the situation. Looking over at Abby, I could see she knew something I did not. Miss Robertson loudly said, "Abbigale, I need you to come over here. I need you to come with us." Abby looked at me with terror in her face. One of the officers grabbed her by the arm. I remained frozen. I was in shock and had no idea what to do. As they walked her away, she had her free hand on her face as if she were guilt-stricken by something. I was trapped in an analytical state again. Having seen the guilty posture she had taken and the look in her eyes, I found myself consumed by the feeling that the person I loved most in the world had betrayed me. How could I so quickly doubt her after all we had been through? "The person I loved most," I mumbled to myself aloud. I loved her more than anything or anyone. I didn't even care about whatever she had done, as it didn't make a difference. She was everything to me. Without a second thought, I chased after them, following them to Miss Robertson's office. The two officers took Abby inside, leaving Miss Robertson outside the room. As I approached Miss Robertson and her office, she jumped in my face, hysterically saying loudly, "This is what I was talking about. This is why I warned you, James." Her finger was shaking in my face, but I ignored her clear emotional imbalance and asked, "What exactly is going on here?" She replied, seeming somewhat relieved but strongly condescending, "You have been dating her now for how long? And you don't know?" I replied, "No." She answered, "I can't tell you, but if she didn't pull you in on this, well, it just makes me happy that you're not also an accomplice." "Accomplice to what?" I asked, but Miss Robertson took a step back, crossed her arms, and refused to say anything else. Inside the office, the police had already closed the blinds. All I could hear was them talking in stern, muffled voices, as Abby responded softly in a collected tone. I was happy that whatever was going on, Abby was handling it with a level head. I had never known her to lose her temper or act irrationally, but this event created fear and doubt that the person I had fallen for may not have been who... No more of this. I had to have faith in her. She didn't just deserve my support, she relied on it. We both needed to stand by each other through it all. Like two pillars leaning only against one another. If one of us fell, we would find ourselves both shattered to pieces on the floor. After about 30 minutes, one of the officers opened the door to let her out. Abby walked out, not knowing how I would react, and I immediately walked up to her and hugged her. She whimpered with a sound of relief. Miss Robertson saw this and exploded into a rage, screaming, "You are letting her go!" One of the cops replied, "There's no real proof she did anything." Miss Robertson yelled, "She is responsible for everyone who died in the shooting. She told her boyfriend to do it! It was on the letters you found at Seth's home. It was in her hand!" Miss Robertson abruptly stopped speaking. Like an irresponsible child, she shouted something that she could neither prove nor had the right to say. All she could do now is give up. One of the officers replied, Like I said, you're speculating. She didn't use specific wording needed to. We literally just. The officer paused and rolled his eyes, realizing that none of his words were resonating with her. He continued, Never mind. You just go about your business and leave that girl alone. The two officers immediately began heading out as Miss Robertson turned to us with an enraged look in her eyes. I was still trying to cope with what I had just heard. Abby turned to me, looking worried that I was going to react as if I believed everything Miss Robinson said. But I didn't. I couldn't take the side of a woman who was proving herself to be progressively losing her mind and who had a clear biased agenda over my beautiful, loving Abby. In a soft, slightly quivering voice, Abby said to me, I didn't say that. I promise. I replied, Promises are for people who can't be trusted on their word alone. I'll always believe in you, Abby. She grabbed me and hugged me as Miss Robertson yelled, Oh, you two are perfect for each other. Then I muttered in response with a slight smile, Perfectly imperfect. Abby gave out a sad laugh, accompanied by her already falling tears in response. We never stopped reminding ourselves how wonderful it was to have each other, and took so much pride in knowing we would always be there for one another. I walked Abby to her next class and headed over to mine immediately after. We were both late, but neither of our teachers seemed to care. The shooting changed a lot of how the teachers treated us, and not just with tardiness. There were rules they'd literally ignore that they never did before, all for the sake of not upsetting us. After school, Abby and I met on the bus, a sad vehicle that had become little more than a painful reminder we would never see Davis again. It amazed me how buses in general were completely ruined for me, but I didn't have a choice in the matter. And even if I did, in a way the pain just brought me closer to him. I kept wondering when the heartache would end. Maybe it never will. Arriving home, Abby closed the front door and said, James, I need to talk to you. I walked over to my room, dropped my bag to the floor, sat on my bed. I told the police the truth, she said. I replied, That means you are completely innocent? She responded, Not exactly, James. I felt the familiar wave of panic overtake me, my heart giving me a horrible sinking feeling. My head lowered. I lost eye contact with her and I remained silent. She then said, When I was dating Seth, I was really messed up. You know that, James. I maintained my silence, listening, hoping she wasn't going to say something that would rip me in half. When I was depressed and cutting, I told Seth in multiple letters that I wished everyone would just disappear. But that's... Instantly, like a muscle response, I stood up, turning her remaining words into a silent panic, and walked into the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. I began pulling off my clothes, alone in the bathroom, and turned on the shower. Even the sound of the warm water shooting out of the shower head and smacking against the back of the tub couldn't disguise the sound of Abby crying in the other room. I got into the shower, collapsed on the floor, and lost myself in thought. I was overwhelmed by the fact Abby just admitted she told someone who wound up being a school shooter that she wished everyone would disappear. She didn't tell him to kill anyone, I told myself. She didn't actually say she wanted him to do anything. I thought with my arms wrapped around my knees, with my head resting on my arms. The water poured around the side of my face and into my eyes. I looked down to see I haven't even remembered to remove my boxers. I felt like my life was just another sad, tear-drenched sob story, and happiness was the only intermission. I then asked myself, who hasn't wished someone wasn't there? Who hasn't wished they were all alone when they feel like everyone around them doesn't understand them? That doesn't mean they want people to be shot. That doesn't mean they would genuinely want anyone to be subjected to that kind of suffering. I then reminded myself that we all make our own happiness, that I could continue to view sorrow and emptiness as the main theme in my life, but that wasn't the fault of uncontrollable conditions. I had a choice. I was going to choose to stand up, turn off the water, and return to catch the tears of the woman I loved. Opening up the bathroom door, still soaking, I could see Abby across the hall, looking up, with tears still running down her face. Oh shit, bitch, run. She was scared. She didn't know why I had come back out. I approached her and lifted her up by the center of her back and the back of her leg, just as I had in the middle of her class some time ago. She started giving me a sad, scared look. I don't understand, as I pulled her close to me. I replied, you didn't want anyone to die. You just wanted to be alone so no one could judge you or hurt you anymore. That's not uncommon, Abby. You did nothing wrong. She let out a cry of relief and wrapped her arms around me. I kissed her on the neck as I held her whole body. She gave out a tearful laugh, saying, "You're all wet." I smiled and laid her on the bed, kissing her as I removed her clothes. She kissed me passionately, smiling whenever our lips were seconds apart. She felt accepted and relieved. I chose happiness. He's like the mayor of fucking crazy. I thought Abby was dead for sure. I thought James was going to walk down that hallway and she would have cut herself to ribbons. But luckily enough, Abby lives on. But that's conversation for another day. This has been Doctorpiece Theater. And my name is Dr. Dennis Business. And as always, my friends,